Tonight, we finally begin our series on United States Southern Dogman and Werewolf encounters. This episode takes us through 7 frightening encounters from Tennessee, as well as North Carolina and more. So sit back and enjoy the scare. 2002. I'm a 32-year-old female from the very northern tip of West Virginia. Most of my life has been lived in Hancock County. When I was little, we camped in tents, walked everywhere, hiked at parks, all that outside goodness. In my teens, we started going to state parks to ride horses. I've been to Tumblesome Run, Beaver Creek, State Park, Salt Fork, Raccoon Creek, and Vista Park, and I think that was the name. We had a friend who was constantly inviting us to ride on people's land she had received permission from. I'm well acquainted with the local wildlife. I've seen all the major players, including coy dogs and bears, and I can identify most sounds in the forest. I love watching nature documentaries. I was looking to become a vet, so I studied a lot. Drawing and painting them got me very acquainted with animal anatomy. Was I ever into cryptozoology? Yes, I was a dino-crazy little girl. My one babysitter had Reader's Digest Mysteries of the Unexplained. The thought of a plesiosaur in Scotland or an apatosaur in the Congo was just mind-blowing. Later in life, I started looking at it like folklore. It was interesting to read the accounts and learn the theories behind what people were seeing, but I believed in them as much as a folklorist believes in dragons and trolls. I didn't have any interest in Bigfoot, and I never heard of Dogman. I never had interest in looking, nor did the thoughts ever cross my mind. It did seem to me, though, that it seems I didn't need to go looking, though. They found me. We moved to the farm when I was about 10. Mom's dream was to have horses, and she was finally able to live it. The farmhouse was haunted, mainly by the former residents of the house. I never felt threatened by them, though. It's a little unnerving to have 2 men talking and moving the couch you're sitting on. Or should I say, it sounded like it. No one was home, no media was on, and yet I was hearing 2 men talking about how they were going to move the couch, and where, and the sound of the furniture being dragged right under me. The land itself had its share of strangeness. Most things were benign, though. We just shrugged and carried on. I honestly hated our woods. Anywhere else, I'd freely hike, but even in the yard, sometimes I felt watched. Hell, sometimes I thought something was staring in our windows. Now that I think of it, we did have things slam into our trailer. I think it was a horse that had gotten loose, but when I'd go out to investigate, I wouldn't find a thing. I'd chalk it up to a deer. I used my horses' breeds for their names rather than think up names for them. Anyone who knows me knew my horses' names. I was 18 and 19 in this particular encounter, and by this time, we gave up on cows. I hate cows, and just had horses and chickens. Someone knocked at the door, and it was at 2 a.m. I'd only been asleep for 2 hours, but years of conditioning had my heart pumping and my mind clearing. Someone knocking that early meant trouble. It usually meant horses or livestock had gotten out. I wasn't disappointed. Our neighbor said the horses were in his yard. My mind wasn't totally awake, so I didn't think to ask which yard they were in. My stepfather came out, asked what was up, and told me they were my horses, so deal with it. Mom was working at the time, and that was nothing new. This lot of horses had 3 expert escape artists. I had the routine down. It was pretty dark out, but I did have some moonlight to help. The security light only went so far. Then, of course, it shut off after so long. When it was cloudy, you could literally have to watch that you didn't walk off into the ravine. It was so pitch black. I was naturally in a foul mood, cursing my horses, and wondering if some drunk had gone through the fence again. It happened a lot, believe it or not. As I got closer to the brown barn, I realized a horse was flipping out. It was running back and forth, squealing and carrying on. I went in and grabbed the halters and leads, and paused for a moment to see if there was any other horse or horses had replied to the horse I heard squeal. That would give me an idea where the other horse or horses might be. There was no reply. That was odd. I was thinking, crap, they're on the other side of the hill. It was the only reason in my mind they wouldn't be replying. Let's just say when they followed our cut trails to the other side, it took us an hour to traverse the woods and lead them back. And even with 2 guys on a 4-wheeler and my mom, that was a freaky trek. I felt like I was being watched and followed. Maybe it wasn't paranoia. So the land is set up like this. The brown barn was connected to a small pasture, about half an acre long, which then connects to a 7-acre pasture. Pretty much in the center, on the outside edge of a large pasture, was an old white barn that we turned into a run-in. I decided to tackle the horse still in the fence, so I can bring her down to the small pasture, just to keep her from escaping too. Maybe the others would follow. I had to walk clear to the other side of the pasture to get to the panicking horse. It was my mother's psycho horse. I tried to catch her and nearly got trampled a few times trying. She was frothing at the mouth and her eyes white were really showing. Was I alarmed? No. As I said, psycho. I noticed my other 6 were across the road. They were standing in a tiny, little fenced-in area under a spotlight. They were standing motionless and not touching a blade of grass. I was wondering how the neighbor managed to herd them into that tiny fenced-in area with that tiny door. 3 of those horses were over 16 hands tall. One was a draft horse cross. The doorway was actually small enough. He touched both sides, going through. My thoroughbred mare took me 2 hours to corral, and the last time she got out, much to my frustration, was an awesome jumper. So, a stranger rounding them up and putting them into a tiny yard was mind-blowing. I've had horses since I was 9. I'm 32 now. I've had ponies and horses. I've had a couple of different Arabians, draft horses, quarter horses, walking horses, saddlebreds, and other thoroughbreds and Mustangs, and all different kinds. I've had a lot of horses from all walks of life. I will tell you, they consistently do not like to be crammed into tight spaces, no matter what breed it is, especially not in a group. They were just silent and dead still. My neighbor came out and told me that they were like that when he found them. He asked me if I needed any help, but I told him no. My thoroughbred and racking horse mares did not like men. I told him I'd take them out one at a time. I took one halter and lead and threw the rest outside the gate. I put the halter on my gelding and opened the gate to lead them out. They had other plans though. All 6 came out as a freaking unit. They were literally chest to butt crammed together. My gelding and my Welsh mare had their chests pushing against me as we walked back to the brown barn. Normally, they did not do this. I wouldn't usually allow such a bad behavior. We were on the main road, which I did not like. The speed limit is only 35, but people go 60 all the time. So I tried to lead them through the large pasture gate. They wouldn't even go on that side of the road though. I was a little unnerved by their strange behavior. So I led them down to the brown barn, and they went in. They were skittish at first, though, picking at the hay I threw out, walking around relentlessly, sticking to the barn like glue, and eyeing the upper pasture. I rationalized it by thinking, it's the appy flipping out that's unnerving them, and why hadn't she come down yet? She had to have seen us all walk down. I rushed to the gate between the little and big pastures out of habit. I didn't want the herd to go back out into the big pasture. I didn't have to worry. They didn't follow me like they usually did. The gate was wide open, but the appy was still running and squealing back and forth in the same area. I started to go get her. Now the neighbor's security lights didn't really light up my pasture. The road was higher than my pasture, so it was cast in a shadow. I can make out her shape in some detail though. She took off at a panicked gallop, swerved sideways, and jumped the stream. When she landed, she nearly landed on her face. She caught herself through and took off at a dead gallop again. I ducked behind a stump. If she would have hit me, I would have been dead. I went back and chained the gate. I decided to forego licking her over until I got the halters and leads. She was too hot at the moment. I decided to walk on the road instead of the pasture again. The pasture wasn't even, unlit, and full of springs. Sometime though, during this, clouds had taken over the sky, so there was no moonlight to be seen. The spot on the road though, where I was at, was paved and pretty well lit, though my neighbor was paranoid. I had almost gotten to the white barn when I got this sudden urge to stop and look at a very specific spot in the pasture. I would like to say it was instinct that told me to look, but usually I'd scan the woods first to see what was watching me. That's usually where the watchers are. Instead, I just flicked on my flashlight right on a certain spot. It was extremely close to where the mare was flipping out. I saw red eye shine. My first thought was, why in the world would a deer be there with all that chaos? I was feeling a sense of extreme dread and didn't know why. Besides, it being where my horse was going nuts told me something else just wasn't right. I then realized where the eyes were relative to the walnut trees and my racing barrels. See, the road is above the pasture and the walnut trees were right at the same elevation as the road. The pasture itself is sloped to deal with the runoff from the road. The barrel it was next to was on the low end of the incline. The barrels were white, so I could see a dim lighting from my flashlight on one of it was next to. This thing was too freaking big to be a deer. I was frozen standing there, watching it. I just had this feeling it was evil, and then I had to keep track of those eyes. It was watching me. It slowly blinked a few times. It also looked over into the woods, above the pasture. I know you ask your guests if they ever feel there are other ones out there. Well, let me tell you, it crossed my mind. With a sinking stomach, I flashed my flashlight over the woods to see if I would catch eyeshine. I didn't see any though, so I went right back to the eyes. They were still there. I flicked back and forth, making sure nothing was sneaking up on me. I don't know how long I stood there, watching frozen. Someone could have come around the bend and hit me with their car. I was so focused. Finally, it started to move off. It glanced at me sideways a few times. I think it went into the copse of trees around the creek. I heard nothing. That wasn't surprising though. The horses were still restless and making noise. I stood there a long time after looking for the eyeshine. I was wondering if it could have been a bear. I don't think so though. The eyes were consistent in height until it disappeared. Bears are clumsy on their back legs. On this uneven inclined ground, I have no doubt a bear would have dropped to the ground to go on all fours. Even the rear up and down behavior bears do when they're trying to see something wouldn't work. We had one cross our pasture before and he made a lot of noise going through the woods. The horses settled down quicker with the bear. I was almost to my neighbors at this point, and I considered leaving the couple $100 of tack at his house. I had no doubt if I left them there, they'd be gone in the morning, and my mom would be pissed. So I darted over, grabbed them, and ran like a bat out of hell. I should have left the tack. I know, you're not supposed to run, but I couldn't even conceive what I had just seen. I got into the barn, threw the tack down, and hung with the horses. I wasn't going to go back up that pitch black driveway on foot. I figured with the horses I'd have a warning, and the barn had plenty of sharp things. I didn't go back up until dawn. I was frozen stiff by that time. I've had years to think this over. It unnerves me that whatever it was watching me for however long. How long was that thing there? Was that what was keeping Appy Mare from coming down? Was it right there in the shadows while I was trying to catch her? Or was it in the unlit barn I walked through to get to the road? Was it the reason Appy swerved and nearly fell? How did my horses get out? I never did find out how they got out. Did they panic and jump? I did check the fence line away from the woods, and I did look for other tracks around the barrel. Sadly, the ground was hard from frost in the morning, but I will say the Appy Mare was running for a good while, and the ground was severely torn up and turned into a muddy mess. I'll bet it was her that woke the neighbor up. To this day, I'm not quite sure what it was that I felt and experienced. I just hope that it never comes back around my horses ever again. Date unknown. My stepdad lived in Virginia when he was around the age of 8, right at the edge of the Great Dismal Swamp. According to him, he was in bed one night when the sky was cloudless or just very bright. He never thought until recently whether the moon was shining or not, and saw a beast looking right at him through his window. He said he could see spittle running down its face, and its eyes were looking straight at him. It was supposedly standing on its hind legs and had cream, red, and brown colored matted fur and a face almost like a wolf. Other than its snout, its facial features were very human. Its jawbones were high, and the structure around its eyes and its eyes themselves were human-esque. The coloring of its eyes, he believes, were yellow. The reason why I think this is interesting and possibly valid is because the Great Dismal Swamp covers a huge amount of territory and is hardly touched by humans. Only in recent years have people started to study its inhabitants. The grounds are wet, mossy, and absorb sound quite well. People have been known to wander into it and never return. Who knows what could be lurking in the unknown? Just chills my bones to think about. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that he crawled out of his bed and went straight to his mother's room. In the morning, when they looked around the house, all the windows had ground that was stirred up under them and the grass was yanked out. There were actual scratches in the wood under his window, and paint was missing too. However, as far as they could see, there were no discernible footprints. Story 3. Date unknown. Just thought I would report this as a potential Dogman hearing, not a sighting. Multiple coworkers of mine in Shelby County, Tennessee, medical facility have heard a strange creature screaming and making crystal clear sounds behind the facility. It is well lit, fenced, but there are woods behind and also a river bottom near. 3 separate people have heard the noise, 2 together, one at an earlier time last summer. This most recent event happened within the last month. When discussing it, the third person confidently says that they had also heard the noise in the pre-dawn house while getting something from their vehicle and couldn't believe it, so they had never mentioned it to anyone. After hearing the details of what the other 2 heard, the third person confided. All 3 are medical professionals, have outdoor experience, and cannot identify the creature making the sounds. They described it as being loud, crystal clear, and even though it was from an obvious distance, the call was loud enough to be heard clearly from within a running car with defroster blowing. This occurred at twilight, roughly 6 to 7 a.m. Also, since this occurred near shift change, there were several ladies coming into work who obviously heard the noise too and rushed inside the building, as observed by the 2 who were leaving. Story 4. Date unknown. Laugh at me. I really don't care. I don't know what I saw, but it looked like a cross between a guy and a wolf. I shit you not. I was on my way home from work. I was maybe 10 minutes away from the house, coming up a big hill. I suddenly got the strangest feeling, so I slowed down thinking a deer was going to come out of the woods or something. I just felt like I was being watched or followed. There were no cars in front of me or behind me. I got to the top of the hill and slammed on my brakes because as soon as I got to the top of the hill, this huge, black, hairy thing came bounding across the road. It was so big that when it ran, its back arched up, kind of like a cheetah, but only a lot more than that. I know that if it would have stood up, it would have been well over 6 feet tall, maybe even taller. I also know another car saw it too, because when I hit the brakes, another car turned onto that road and slammed onto their brakes too. We both just sat there for a few minutes, which was not really safe considering it, I know, but we were in shock. I truly have no idea what it was that I saw. It was not a dog or a horse. Dogs do not get that big or arch their backs like this thing did when it was running. The arms and legs, whatever it had, were so long, it was having to throw them out to the side. Think kind of like a crab walk, just to run. And the appendages it had were just as big as it was. It ran from one side of the woods to the other, non-stop, like it was either going after something or running away from something. I honestly have no idea what the holy freaking hell it was that I saw, and I don't care if you laugh at me. I know what I saw. Story 5. 2012. I'd like to tell you about the encounter my son had, maybe 4 years ago. He had told me about it then, but I had no clue. Now we have Dogman encounters, and now I know. Here's what happened. My son's friend was driving him home about 11 p.m. through a rural residential area. The houses are spaced some distance apart. They were on a 2-lane highway with no streetlights and very little traffic. The area is not overly wooded, but has patches of trees and fields. This area would probably be included in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. Anyway, they were driving along when suddenly, from the right side of the road, this thing sprang out and was across the road and into the bushes on the other side in just 2 leaps or bounds, or steps, or however you want to say it. It was in full view because of their headlights. My son said the first thing he thought was dog. He went on to say that it was running on all fours like a deer. He said it was the cooler version of a deer with a huge dog head, massive shoulders, and a really small waist. He kept repeating just how big it was, so I asked for a comparison. I asked if he meant huge like maybe big deer, or was it maybe as tall as a cow? He answered and can quote his answer. "Mom, this thing was massive. If we had hit it, the car would have gone underneath it and its body would have hit the windshield." I don't remember what kind of car it was, but it was about the size and shape of one of those older Sentras. He said that neither he or his friend said anything for about 10 seconds, and then his friend yelled, "Did you see that?" My son said yes, and they didn't say another word the rest of the way. And that's it. It's really creepy to me, and I thought other listeners might like to hear about it. Story 6. July 1990. I was around 9 years old or so and was at my mom's friend's house because they were having a little get-together. My mom's best friend at the time decided to go get something, which was at a house nearby down a dirt road in the woods. My mom's friend decided to take me and friend with her. I wish I had never gone with her. We rode out with her over there, and when she got out, my friend and I stayed in her car and waited for her to come back. After sitting in her car for 10 minutes, we decided to get out to see what was taking her so long. When we did that, she told us to get back in the car, so we did. As it turned out, she was buying weed, so we weren't welcome in the house. So my buddy and I got back in her car and waited for her to come out. They had a lot of bulldogs on that property. The dogs had all been barking like crazy and then just stopped all at once and went into their dog houses. That's when my friend and I saw this thing that looked like some kind of werewolf coming from behind the car. We froze and just stared at it as it walked by. Wow, it looked so evil and demonic. When we saw it, we ducked down and laid on the floorboards, and we lay there for what seemed like forever until we heard my mom's friend hitting on the driver's window, trying to get us to let her in. I guess it left when it heard her come out of the house or something. Who knows, maybe it was lurking around the area, just waiting for the right time. Story 7. On the night I had my brief encounter, it was unusually slow. During slow parts of my night, I park outside the facility I work out of and watch the wildlife. It's abundant, with a mixture of fox, coyotes, raccoons, and every once in a while, I'll spy a red wolf breaking the woodline, trotting across an open field in search of small game. Our facility is located on a dead-end street, which backs up to a major creek, and to the left, we have a smaller creek that breaks off to the larger one. Both creeks are fed by a large river about a mile away. I should also mention that we have large patches of woodland that lead to our facility, that the area does not have a lot of light until you turn into the parking lot. About a week prior to my encounter, I would sit at the end of the road to complete my paperwork and wait for the next call to come. As I parked there, I would get a sense of being watched. I would look up, almost expecting someone to be standing in front of my truck. Let me say that darkness or the woods does not spook me in the slightest, or even make me jumpy. I was raised in the swamp, close to a river, and rather enjoy the solitude. Not only did I have a sense of being watched and sharing my space with someone, I noted that there were no normal night sounds, such as crickets and frogs and what have you. I also found it baffling that all the wildlife seemed to be gone from the area. This really bothered me, and I couldn't figure it out. On the night I had my encounter, I decided to leave some wet dog food at the edge of the woodline, hoping to entice a family of raccoons out, so I could at least see that they were okay. This family of raccoons I had watched grow up from kits, and not seeing them bothered me. Also, I didn't see a gray fox that would hang around that area. This fox would come within 4 to 5 feet from you, but would be guarded all the while. He would hang out with certain people and then retreat back into the woods. Anyway, I popped the top off some smelly dog food, and as I was pulling the top of the can, I heard a deep growl come from out of the edge of the woodline. I had never heard an animal growl with such force and so deeply. At first, I thought it could have been a jake brake from the interstate. That can be heard from our facility, but that's not what it was. I could hear it from the woodline, hitting my face, and felt the growl inside of my chest, pretty much like a vibration. I knew this wasn't a bear, the same as someone knows their left hand from their right. You just know. And yes, we do have bear here, but I can tell you quite bluntly and very firmly this was not a bear or any other wildlife that was normal to the area. I dropped my head down and refused to look up. I dumped the can of food on the ground with one hard thump, hoping whatever it was in the woodline would rather have the can of food instead of me. I backed away from the food with my head down until I reached my truck. My instinct told me to drive away, and so I did. About a half an hour later, I returned, and due to my curiosity overruling my common sense. Being a natural skeptic, I was prepared to figure out the earlier event. I parked in the same place, and this time had walked to the back of my truck to smoke. While standing there, I observed a dark mass come across the road and disappear into an open field that is mostly overgrown with wild blackberry bushes and grass. I have a trained eye. I take in a lot of detail, and still, I had to admit suffering from short-term memory loss due to a TBI that ended my law enforcement career. What I saw at that moment, though, will be in my memory forever. I can only describe this creature as what I took at the time to be some kind of hybrid. Although it was on all fours, to me, it did not appear natural by any means. It moved with very quick, fluent motions. Looking back, I was most surprised by the creature having the intelligence to attempt to appear natural. Something was off with its gait, though. It was kind of like the front legs were pulling its body forward. The back was hunched at the shoulders, and it had a long back. The creature itself was black, which I can only describe as a dark mass, with really no reflection. I also noted it had a small animal in its mouth. The strange part was that I could see the definition of most of the small animal compared to the darkness of the creature that I now believe to be a Dogman. The snout was long, but fit its body. What struck me most were its ears. They were folded back like you might see on a Dutch Shepherd or even a German Shepherd. I guess with my background, working with dogs, the ears were clearly defined to me. I can't say what kind of tail it had or what color its eyes were. I just know it was there 1 minute and gone the next. When daylight came, I looked for tracks but listened to my gut and did not enter that field looking for it. The ground leading out of the smaller creek was covered in grass, and what dirt was there was hard. I was left baffled, but more amazed than anything. I sat on my experience for several months. I didn't tell anyone about it. I then started searching the internet for what I had seen. I guess, in my mind, I wondered if it was some type of hybrid creature created by man and had somehow escaped. I found several sites on the internet, but none seemed to come close to what I had seen. Nothing until I came across a picture of a supposed Dogman. If you take what I saw and stand it upright, instead of being on all fours, that's what I saw. Without a doubt, I'm pretty sure this Dogman was a young adult, but it wasn't overly massive. What I ponder the most is the fact that the Dogman had to catch my scent before clearing out the woodline. I know scent. I know how it works. The Dogman knew I was there before coming out of the woods. I suppose that will be the answer I will never have. After a few months of just keeping my experience to myself, I spoke with a few of my coworkers. Of course, they told me it was a bear or a large wolf, but they did acknowledge that the wildlife had disappeared for a while. I was told to share my story, but I think it was only so my coworkers could get a good laugh at me behind my back. I stand by what I saw, although I don't speak about it much because of people like him. As I write this, I'm once again on the night shift, parked at the same spot where I had my encounter. I'm pretty sure that Dogman has left the area. Wildlife is back and the night sounds are all around. I guess I will always wonder if it will come back again. But I can't say I will ever walk in the woods at night again by myself looking for animal tracks. Thanks for watching this video. If you like my content, subscribe and be sure to leave a comment. Stay tuned since we're going to start having a lot of really cool stories come down the pipeline. Not only just Werewolf and Dogman, but stories no one has ever heard of or has ever been released, period. I got the dirt that people want. Stay tuned.